You've definitely heard of this one. It's one of the most famous events in American history. A moment so charged, it was basically a flashpoint. Today, we're going to unpack the story of the Boston Massacre, a clash that would pretty much light the fuse for a revolution. So let's get right into what really went down on that freezing Boston night.
I mean, really think about that question for a second. It sounds kind of crazy, right? But it's at the absolute heart of our story. How could a street brawl, something that started with snowballs and name-calling, escalate into an event that put an entire continent on the path to war?
So, picture this. It's a freezing night in Boston. The air is thick with shouting, you can hear ice and sticks clattering on the cobblestone, and then the sharp crack of musket fire. It was a night of pure chaos, one that would be remembered for centuries. But to really understand why it happened, we gotta rewind a bit. Yeah, these soldiers didn't just appear out of nowhere. Them being in Boston was the result of years of anger and resentment just building and building. We need to get our heads around how this city became such a powder keg, basically just waiting for a single spark.
Okay, so it all started with money. Shocker, right? After a really expensive war, Britain was broke, and they looked across the ocean to their American colonies to help pay the bills. They started imposing all these new taxes, which, you can imagine, the colonists saw as a massive overreach. Protests started popping up, some got violent, and by 1768, Britain had sent 4,000 soldiers to Boston to enforce the law and, keep the peace.
And this, right here, this was the rallying cry. This was the big idea that everyone got behind. It wasn't just about paying a few extra cents for stamps or tea. For the colonists, this was a fundamental violation of their rights. I mean, how could some government thousands of miles away tax them when they had zero voice, no elected officials in that government's parliament?
But this wasn't just some high-level political debate. No, this friction was personal. It was playing out on the streets every single day. The soldiers, who were often poorly paid, would take on part-time jobs, which meant they were competing with local workers. Colonists started seeing them as an occupying army, this unwelcome force right in their neighborhoods. And the soldiers, well, they were just trying to do a job, but they were constantly facing insults and hostility. You could just feel the tension on every street corner.
All right, so let's jump back to the night of March 5th and see how all this simmering tension finally just boiled over. All it took was one small, seemingly insignificant argument to unleash the violence that had been building for years. And things just spun out of control with shocking speed. It all kicked off with a simple argument over a bill. A soldier, Private White, gets involved, strikes the colonist. Next thing you know, a crowd gathers, angry, bold. They start chucking whatever they can find, snowballs, chunks of ice, clubs. Reinforcements arrive, which only makes the scene more tense. And then someone yells, "Fire." In all the confusion, the soldiers shoot into the crowd. A street argument had just turned into a massacre. In the moments right after, Boston was in an absolute uproar. But what happened next? Well, it was truly surprising. Instead of mob justice, the British soldiers were actually going to face a colonial court of law. And when the smoke cleared, 5 colonists were dead. 5. They became the first fatalities in a conflict that was quickly escalating from a war of words to a war of weapons. And these are the men who lost their lives. It's so important to see them not just as a number, but as people. A rope maker, a 17-year-old kid, an immigrant. The first to fall was Crispus Attucks, a sailor of African and Native American heritage. He's now considered by many to be the very first casualty of the American Revolution. Now, here's a twist in the story you might not have seen coming. The person who stepped up to defend the soldiers was none other than John Adams, a passionate patriot and, of course, a future president. So why would he do it? Because Adams had this deep, unwavering belief that every single person, no matter how hated they were, deserved a fair trial and a proper defense. For him, it was a fundamental principle. So did Adams's defense work? You bet. He argued that the soldiers weren't cold-blooded murderers. He painted a picture of frightened men who genuinely feared for their lives, acting in self-defense against a violent mob. And the jury, for the most part, agreed. Captain Preston and 6 of his men were acquitted completely. 2 others were found guilty of a lesser charge, manslaughter. So the legal chapter might have closed, but the story of the massacre, that was just getting started. Colonial leaders were absolute masters of communication, and they knew exactly how to turn this tragic, chaotic street fight into a powerful symbol of British tyranny. And the key tool they used to do it was propaganda.
They took the raw, messy facts of what happened and shaped them to serve a political purpose. And that purpose was to unite the colonies and turn public opinion squarely against the British. And this, right here, is probably the most famous piece of propaganda from that entire era. Paul Revere's engraving of the Bloody Massacre. Well, it wasn't exactly an accurate picture of what happened. It shows this organized line of British soldiers firing on a peaceful, unarmed crowd, with their captain ordering them to shoot. The reality was much, much messier. But this powerful, simplified image, it spread like wildfire through the colonies, and it completely shaped how countless people understood what happened that night.
The impact was just undeniable. This chart gives you a sense of the scale. The story of the massacre, fueled by images like Revere's, caused anti-British feelings to just skyrocket. It gave the 13 separate colonies a shared tragedy, a common enemy, which made them stronger and more unified. You could say this event seriously shortened the road to open revolution just 5 years later. And in that process, the 5 victims were elevated. They weren't just guys killed in a riot anymore. They became martyrs for the cause of American liberty. Their deaths became a constant rallying cry against what was seen as British oppression. And that kind of leaves us with this final thought. The Boston Massacre shows us that history isn't just about what happens. It's about the story we tell about what happens. It really forces us to ask, when does a tragic event stop being just a tragedy and start becoming a cause so powerful it can change the world?